All right, so let's talk about these 400s at the USA Olympic trials, both on the men's as well as the women's side, where we saw some pretty big surprises considering the landscape of the USA 400 entering these Olympic trials. So let's kick off first with the men, where through the rounds, we saw some consistency across the board from some guys like Quincy Hall, from Vernon Norwood. Michael Norman looked really good. Even, Quincy Wilson, the high schooler, he was, setting world records all throughout the rounds. But going into the final, I don't think it was, really clear exactly who was the favorite. You had someone like Bryce Deadman. He ran 44.44, which was one of his fastest times since April or so, earlier in the season. You had Quincy Hall. He was a top qualifier going into the final with 44.42. Clear season's best for him. You had, Quincy Wilson. He was setting the world records, right? 44.6 in the heats and then 44.59 in the semis. He was looking good. Now, I wasn't going to pick him to win, but he was turning into a shot to make top three. He was looking very good. Vernon Norwood, 44.5. So there were a lot of guys who were in the conversation. Even Michael Norman, where in his semifinal, he only ran 45.1, but the way that he ran his semi, essentially shutting it down from 300 meters into the race, looking around with the last 100. I mean, he looked very, very comfortable going into the final. Now, as we enter the final, a couple interesting things that I kind of picked up on, and this actually occurred on the women's final as well, where you had Quincy Hall. Like I said, he was the top qualifier going into the final with that 44.42, but in the final, he actually ended up all the way on the outside in lane 8. So kind of strange in terms of their seating and how they're, picking athletes to, in which lanes they're going to go. I don't know, but regardless, the final played out in a pretty interesting way where Michael Norman, he was running on the middle of the track. He went out like a shot. I mean, his first 200 meters was 20.90 seconds. His first 100, his second 100 was 10.09. He was flying all across the first half. Now, when we got to the second half, he did start to falter a little bit. We got into the home straight. He was still leading, but then the field started to pick up. And this is where Quincy Hall, coming from the outside, managed to pull away from the win. He has that kind of, it's not the best form or quote-unquote best form in terms of, prettiest looking or whatever, but he gets it done. His arms flailing, he's pushing to the finish line, and he runs a massive personal best of 44.17 seconds. Last year at the Budapest World Championships, he got the bronze medal in the 400. He ran a personal best to do that as well. This year, he, hadn't looked as good when we're talking about times on paper. He was out in China. He had run, not too great. Took some time off a little bit, came to the Diamond Leagues in Stockholm as well as Oslo, got the wins there. So he was really, really good entering the trials, but he got the win here, 44.17. Michael Norman, he did hold on for a second, right? It was really kind of scary in the last 100 where it was getting very, very close. Looked like he was almost going backwards. The rest of the field was going forwards, but he did hold on, get second, 44.41. He was really pissed after this race. He said that he wanted to get that win. And I think that proves that, he understands that he has a lot to work on. This proves that he's not done. Imagine he came out and he said, I'm satisfied. I just made the team. So happy. Nah, Michael Norman wants more. And what I like is that he said he's getting more comfortable in the 400, despite dipping into the hundreds, last year, even with the injuries and all that. So I like where his head is at. I'm really confident in what Michael Norman is going to be able to build towards as we look towards Paris. Finally, third place was Chris Bailey. Huge shout outs to Chris Bailey, as he's been one of my favorite athletes all throughout 2024. Coming out of Arkansas a couple years back where he had that amazing indoor 400 of 45.0. Didn't do much at the NCAAs when talking about the championships, but Chris Bailey has shown up in 2024, 44.42 seconds to equal his personal best that he just set, I think at the, down in Atlanta when we were at the Edwin Moses, Legends meet. He showed up. And of course, I picked him for my team. I picked Michael Norman to win. I picked Chris Bailey for second, and then I did pick Vernon Norwood for third. Vernon Norwood finished fourth place, just off 44.47 seconds. So barely missing out 0.05 of a second. Really tragic because, Vernon had been one of those guys who's been so consistent for the United States in the 400. Of course, he's been on a bunch of relays. Last year, he got fourth place at the World Championships in the final. So, I was really rooting for him to get on the team. I also picked Quincy Hall for fourth place, and I didn't pick him for my team. He completely disproved me. I got a chance to speak with him, very briefly in the mixed zone. He said you didn't put me on your team. I ain't talking, shout out to Quincy Hall. He's a man, and he's going to be a medal threat. I think all these guys between Quincy Hall, Michael Norman, Chris Bailey, I think all of them are medal threats. Why? Because the event is completely wide open. And Michael Norman actually said it himself.
Yeah, honestly, it's wide open. Nobody's done nobody's run anything special at this moment. So honestly, it could be anyone's game. And it just depends on how someone executes the race. I know I'm fit. Now it's just a matter of execution. So when we all get on the line, it's going to be who's the best man, and that's going to determine who's the winner.
So I really like where this event is at. Behind Vernon Norwood, we did see Bryce Denman. He ran 44.6. Really tough as, again, he's been, coming back into form when we got to the trials here. He, of course, had a really strong performance at the last Olympic Games where, he ran on both the mixed as well as the 4x4 relay. He had some very strong splits. Even in Eugene 2022, he split something crazy. So Bryce Denman, really tough to not see him on the team, but, he's going to be on that relay. And then, of course, Quincy Wilson. Finished in 6th place after almost, he was out of it in the first 200, the first 300, and then all of a sudden he got things together. So we're going to see, it's still up in the air, I guess, if he's going to be on the relay, but, we'll see. Maybe by the time that this video comes out, he might actually be on it, but this is going to be really good in terms of those 400-meter races. I'm looking to see, where the men's 400 ends up, where, yes, we know guys like Steven Gardner, we know guys like, Wade Van Niekerk, Karani James, but everyone this is so wide open, and it's really hard to pick who is a favorite going into the Olympics in Paris, who's going to get the gold, who's going to get the silver, who's going to get the bronze. Even Matthew Hudson-Smith, I think he pulled out of the European Championship, so hopefully he's healthy, hopefully he's good, because he's definitely in the mix. Bapun Dori from, Botswana, he's in the mix. There's so many guys. Muzala Samukonga from Zambia. There's so many guys who are in the mix for the 400, and it's one of the most exciting events to watch. Now, let's flip over to the women's 400, where this one was another surprise, but I think entering these, Olympic trials, it was very, very wide open. Definitely a lot more than the men's 400 where, we had maybe some favorites. There were some women who were looking really good, but I think the thing is there was a lot of collegiate athletes who were, contending, and some of the top contenders, right? You're talking about Kaylin Brown, 49.13 seconds, at NCAAs, equaling the previous NCAA record, was the American leader on the cusp of 48 seconds. You had a couple other women in the mix, right? Lena Irby-Jackson, Quinair Hayes, Alexis Holmes, right? Aaliyah Butler. So it was really interesting in terms of who was really going to be the top woman entering into the finals at these Olympic trials. But when we got to the heats, one of the biggest surprises was Shamir Little. Now, she, of course, is a 400-meter hurdler, got the silver medal at the Budapest World Championships last year. But she entered into the 400 as well as the 400 hurdles, and she said it was specifically because she just didn't want to stay in the hotel. So she was just going to run the heats and, show up. She ran 50.13 seconds. That was an amazing performance for her to drop something that big in the heats, considering, she hadn't been looking amazing throughout the season, at least on paper, right? She had been running, I think, 51 seconds in the 400. She had only run, 58 seconds in the 400 hurdles. So she dropped a 50.13 seconds to be the top qualifier going into semis. We saw a bunch of other women, all qualified through. But then in the semifinals, this is where things really started to shake up and, really started to unfold on who's looking good. Maybe actually a few more questions than answers in terms of who was really looking good. So Kaylin Brown, of course from Arkansas, she'd been the world lead or USA leader. She ran 49.71 seconds to be the top qualifier going into the finals. Then we saw Kendall Ellis. Kendall Ellis, who has been a veteran for the United States since 2018, 2017, 49.81 seconds to set a personal best, her first personal best since 2018, right? We're talking about 6 years when she ran 49.99 seconds while she was still at USC, I think. So this was a huge performance for her. Aaliyah Butler from Georgia, 50.01. And then a couple other women, right? Shamir Little backed up her performance from the heats. She said that she was going to end up actually going through the rounds despite originally saying she was not, 50.16 seconds. So a lot of women were really in the mix going into the final. We did see some kind of, someone like Alexis Holmes. She didn't look as great as you might have expected. Quinair Hayes, she got into the final. But into this final, this is where things unfolded. This is where things might have surprised everyone, definitely surprised myself. We saw Kendall Ellis come out from lane 8. So remember what I said about Quincy Hall, where he was the top qualifier going into the final and he ended up in lane 8. Kendall Ellis was the number 2 qualifier going into the final, and she ended up in lane 8 as well. I don't know how they're doing, the seeding for the heats or for the final. Regardless, Kendall Ellis, 49.46 seconds to take the win here, to get another massive personal best, and to, book her ticket to her first individual Olympic team in the 400. She's competed at the World Championships individually in 2017, 2019, as well as 2022. But she had missed the Olympic Games in 2021, where she finished 4th place at the Olympic trials. But now she is here. Now she's going to be leading the United States, going to the Olympic trials. And she also had one of the fastest times that we had ever seen at the Olympic trials for a woman in the 400. Sonia Richards-Ross, I think she has the meet record at 49.2 seconds or 49.3. I'll put it up on the screen here, which she ran all the way back in 2012 to win trials. She actually surpassed Chandra Cheeseborough's, meet record from all the way back in 1984. I think that was a 49.3 second race as well. So listen, this 49.46 should not be overlooked. And yes, I know there's so many women who are running 48 seconds, right? We're talking about Natalia Kazmarek, Marla Paulino, who else? Nikisha Price. There's so many women who are in the mix for a 48-second run, but I do think that there's some wiggle room for some surprises to happen. But, the 400 is tough. I ain't gonna lie, right? Rashida Adeleke is there. There's so many women who are in that mix. But I do like Kendall Ellis here. Aaliyah Butler. Now, Aaliyah Butler from Georgia, second place, 49.71 seconds for a huge personal best. She didn't even make the NCAA final. And I think she might have not even made the SEC final in the 400. So for her to come here, make it through the rounds, and to finish second place in a personal best, listen, and she's just coming off her freshman year, I think, in Georgia. This was a huge performance for Aaliyah Butler. It should not be overlooked. Massive, massive performance. And then Alexis Holmes. I can probably argue that Alexis Holmes was the most consistent 400-meter runner to make this team, right, in terms of the top three. Kendall Ellis had not even run 51 or broken 51 seconds entering these Olympic trials. So there was definitely a surprise there. Aaliyah Butler, she didn't even make the NCAA final or the SEC final. So there was definitely a surprise there. Alexis Holmes, she had finished third place indoors at the World Indoor Championships behind Femke Bol as well as Lieke Klaver, where she had been relatively consistent throughout the season so far. So really strong performance for her, and then she set a personal best, 49.78 seconds. So pretty strong team that, the USA is sending to the Olympic Games. Again, it's going to be tough considering the landscape of the women's 400, right? It's not like the men where it's very wide open. We have some very strong players in the women's 4. Now, some big surprises were Kaylin Brown. I think that was probably the absolute biggest surprise. 50.07 seconds to finish in 4th place, just missing the team. Like I said, she was the, top American entering these trials, 49.13 seconds, second place at NCAAs. And she ran 49 seconds in the semifinals, so she looked good. But again, she's only a freshman at Arkansas, so she still has some ways to go. Man, this was an amazing race for the women's 400. I'm excited to see how things play out as we look forward towards Paris. Again, men's is very wide open. Women's, it's kind of have some big players and some big names, but we'll see how things unfold. Let me know what you thought about the men's as well as the women's 400 at these Olympic trials. These were probably one of my favorite performances that we've seen, considering, everything else that went on, both in the sprints, jumps, and hurdles. But exciting performances. Do you think that the USA has a chance to medal, specifically in the women's 400? Also, the men's 400, do you think we have a chance to medal? Quincy Hall, Michael Norman, Chris Bailey, women's side, right? Aaliyah Butler, Kendall Ellis, as well as Alexis Holmes. Going to be competitive. Always appreciate y'all. Thanks for watching.